Sorry, I'm having technical difficulties. I don't know if my internet is not keeping up or what, but we need to go back one here. Anyway, so as far as benefits of home ownership, I know that you guys all have probably been in the library for iPro and looked at all the different forms that they have in there with working with buyers and sellers and things like that. If you haven't been in there, I highly suggest that if you don't have a good presentation put together, and I'm not talking presentation like after you've already met with somebody and you've already made offers on homes. What I'm talking about is putting together a presentation so that you can start to find buyers. And when you find buyers, you're asking them all the right questions of what it is that, you know, they're after, the things that need to be done in order for them to start looking, get qualified and all those kind of things. I think that as agents, especially probably over the past couple of years, since it's been, I call it an easy market because I remember the time that you were lucky to find a buyer, and then if you did have listings, they were, if they would sell in 3 to 4 months, then, that was wonderful. But over the past couple of years, we've seen that, things are just going like crazy. So buyers, if you find a buyer and you're trying to find a home, there's not enough homes out there. But what's happening is that time frame of the time that you have to actually gain a relationship and start to really get to know your clients before you even start working on finding them a home, that time frame has shortened because we're in such a hurry to try to get an offer in, because we're going to get 15 or 20 that are going to be up against us, or whatever. That might be an exaggeration, maybe it's not, depending on what area you're in. But the difference is that I think it's really important that we remember that there's questions that need to be asked ahead of time. And the reason I think that's important is we've got to educate these buyers. Buyers really do depend on us to do the homework, to go out, show them the home, know what needs to be done, know what contracts need to be signed, and all those kind of things. Depending on the age of the buyer, it could be a millennial buyer that's brand new to this. It can be a baby boomer that's been living in the same home for years and years and years now. They're selling a home and going to buy a smaller home, downsize, whatever it happens to be. But the difference is that we have to make sure that we're educating them ahead of time before we even get into the situation where it's too late to try to explain. And we were talking just a minute ago, and we were talking about the COVID-19, the addendum and things like that. How difficult it is to, maybe try to get sellers or buyers to sign it, to extend things or whatever. The problem, I think, sometimes is that when we don't understand it well enough, then we don't know what to do with it. So if somebody else sends it over and it's not something we're aware of or that we've dealt with in the past, that we're kind of like just at the mercy of hurry and read it. Hopefully we can sign it. Hopefully the buyer or the seller agree to it. So I really suggest that if you haven't went through the contracts that we're going to be going through the next few months, that you start to really look at the contracts to see and make sure that you're up to date on them, make sure that you understand what they are. And I know there's a lot out there to have to go through, but it's our responsibility as realtors to, make sure that we know what's in the contract so that we can explain it well enough to our clients. And so before we even get to that point, I think that we have to talk about how do we approach buyers? Where do we get buyers from? Just by comment, if you want to, you don't have to, but you'll have to unmute. I would like to just get an idea of how many of you would prefer to work with a buyer versus working with a seller with the listing side. Anybody want to comment on that?
I know myself, I started working more with my referral, my REO, my SOI, and working more. And the thing I'm finding, I'm just getting more and more buyers referred to me than listings. So. Mm-hmm.
And which in your area, depending on, where you're at, can be tough, right? Because there's not a huge inventory out there.
It's been interesting. And Catherine will be able to know about this. We started back in the day when you actually went out and presented your offer to the seller verbally and in person. And I tried to do that the other day, and the agent would not let me present the offer.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, yeah, that's crazy.
It is
Well,
crazy. And I'm not even going to get into code of ethics, but code of ethics, if you read through that, will tell you that you have the right to do that.
I know, and I told them that, and they said, well, our seller doesn't want that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And if the seller says no, but again, that's a good example, I think, of maybe agents that don't even understand or know that that's an option. And so they don't advise their sellers well enough to say, listen, they actually do have the right to, come in and make the offer to you in person or explain it to you. It's just more probably a lot of agents that just go, oh, you're not doing that. I'm not going to get in front of my agent. It becomes personal, and it's not personal, it's business. And so I think that, from what I understand and from what I gather from the classes that I've done, is most of the time when I talk to agents, I would say the majority of agents will say, I prefer to work with buyers. Because a lot of times they don't know either how to approach and get listings, or it's a little bit tougher because you don't usually get maybe as many referrals for listings as you do like buyers. And so I'm hoping that today, I'm not going to say either way, one or the other. I think that you have to have a good variety. I think you have to have both sides. If you really want to do well and succeed in real estate, you got to be really good, at least know what you're doing on both sides. So a lot of times I have agents ask me, where do I get the buyers? So like you said, Brooke, that is, a good way to get it is your sphere of influence, right? And as we have more and more business that we do, that becomes easier. But for the agents that are newer in the business, or haven't had that experience over the past few years where they, have had to try to get buyers in other places other than a referral from maybe family or something, I want to I just want to kind of come up with a couple of things that maybe some ideas for you guys that might put your mind somewhere else besides just sphere of influence, which is the best, of course. But social media, we all know that social media is huge. People use social media. The problem with social media is right now is it's bombarded because everything's online now. We're just seeing, we're doing this online. We're not even meeting in person anymore. We're not even going over contracts a lot of times with our clients in person because we're having to do it like this on Zoom. But we have so many advertisements and we just have so many things coming through all the time that it's really hard. So what I would suggest to you is there's a few different ways that I would go about right now, probably trying to come up with something different than what everyone else is doing. You've got the agents out there that are either stopping business because they're waiting to see what's going to happen, or you got the other ones on the other side that are saying, it doesn't matter what happens, I'm just going to keep working because, people are always going to buy and sell homes and I'm just not going to let this stop me. Hopefully you're on that end. So, we already know that postcard campaigning and things like that is really, a big deal. Sending out informational things of value, things like that to people that we know. One thing I would really suggest is if you are not working with a good lender that does or offers any kind of buyer seminars, I would really suggest that's something that even if you get with your office and maybe a few of you get together and put that together. So it may be something that has to be done. If you want to try to do it in person down the road, now's a good time to be thinking about when you want to do that, what's a good time to do that. Or if you want to, do this type of thing and do a Zoom and advertise it on Facebook that, hey, we're going to have a live webinar, I guess is what you would call it. We're going to have lenders. We're going to have people on here that are can help you with, credit, get your credit repaired so that you got some of those future buyers lined up as well. If you're not doing that, I really suggest that that's something you might want to consider doing. Credit report companies, there's some good, some bad, just like any other business, but I have worked with quite a few in the past with some lenders that have kind of teamed up. And they're getting those buyers set up. I've got some buyers that a year ago called me on a deal that I had something I had listed. I got talking with them. They didn't qualify. I got them with a lender that could help them. And, they did everything that he had told them to do. And they're about a month away from being able to actually buy a home now. And this was a VA buyer. And all it was is basically they had some things off their credit that needed to be fixed. they needed to go out, maybe get a couple of credit cards that they could use. They taught them how to charge them up at a certain amount and then pay them down and pay them off. I didn't even expect that these people would be coming around a year later, but they're starting to call. And so I think that a lot of times we get stuck in the here and now, and we want it to happen now. And when it's happening now, we're so busy working with the buyers that we forget that we need to work on future buyers. So one thing I would suggest as well is, if with buyer seminars that I've done in the past that worked really well, and this is also called, if you've done any of the Buffini training, they call it the hidden sources of wealth. There's actually a list that you can go through with different people and companies that you can work with to try to get referrals from them as well. But what I've done in the past is I went to employers in the area, and they don't have to be huge employers. A lot of the big corporate companies, they have their own relocation people and things like that. But if you're in an area that you can get with some employers that say they maybe have 15, 20, 40, 50 people that work for them, an idea that you could do is to go put together the same type of a thing like a buyer's seminar, but maybe do a lunch and learn for their employees during their lunch hour. If you want to advertise way ahead of time, tell them that it's really important that you could sit down, you can do it, and then you can schedule the appointments with people after the fact. But if you even had somebody come in with you, title company, well, can't do title companies, I should say that, home warranty companies, things like that would provide a good service that could come there too and give information. Home warranties are really great because they actually offer home warranty most of the time to existing homes where people already own the home and they can buy that. So that's another good avenue. But the point is if you go in and you build a relationship with the owner or the managers or whoever it happens to be, you bring in a small lunch. It doesn't have to be anything real fancy. You go in and do maybe a 10, 15, 20 minute seminar with your lender that talks about home ownership and how important it is, the difference between renting and owning. You start to build a relationship with not just the company, but with the employees, and they start to refer. And I just found that when I went in, a lot of times people didn't realize, number one, that they could buy a home, they were renting, or number two, they had a home and didn't think that, didn't even know how they would go about selling the home or buying another home. I called it was an employee benefit program. And so I would go in and talk with the employer and say, listen, if I can get these people to commit and start trying to purchase a home, you're not only going to have people that are proud to own a home, you're going to have really good employees, because once they buy the home, they feel like they've invested into something, they're going to be reliable, they're going to come to work because they have a payment to make. And then a lot of times what I would do is, if we had the closing at the end, I would let them know that they would get, say, I'll just throw out a number, a $500 gift card or something like that. It would come from me as the agent, but I would usually put it on there that it was something that was coming from the company. So they were getting the idea that not only, were they getting something of value from me, they were getting something of value that the employer really does care about them. So those are just some things that I want to bring up. Relocation companies, if you can get in with them, that's great. But a lot of times these smaller businesses and stuff, even the mom and pop shops, and working with some of the, even restaurants and people that are their cooks and things like that we don't think about sometimes, it's a really good idea to do that. Another thing that I wanted to bring up is that there are about 76 million baby boomers that are still alive and still own property. They're going to be probably selling off, or most of the time, because the way they are, they're going to be passing down properties and homes and things like that to their heirs. And a lot of times these younger people either don't want it, they want to sell it. There's opportunities there. If you are not reaching out to that generation of people in areas that have owned homes for a long time, now would be a really good time to do something like that. Something that none of us want to think about is getting in with, I know this sounds horrible, but funeral services and things like that, funeral planning, helping them get information on emergency preparedness and stuff like that. Those are different ways to get in with people that are in the older generation that need those kind of services. Start working with the assisted living companies and things like that that would possibly refer you to sell homes. Millennials, there's 87 million millennials that are out there that are they're gonna be buying homes. I know it doesn't seem like that. It seems like they're just gonna rent forever, but honestly, statistically, that's not what's happening. If they get good direction, of course, they're always looking for everything on the internet. That's the way that they shop. That's the way that they make friends and everything. If you're not reaching out to them, that's something else that I would really highly suggest that you start thinking about as well. Renters.
It's Kathleen Coyle. If I might just say something about the seniors.
Sure.
We're working with Chad Peck, who is a reverse mortgage lender, and he is really, really good to do little seminars with people that are considering selling their large properties and downsizing as that interim step between owning their big home that they cannot maintain anymore, but they're not ready to go to assisted living yet. They want something in between. And so we show them different, options through getting the reverse mortgage on the new property if they want to pull all the equity out or most of the equity out of their existing home to live on. And then that way we invite their children as well to these seminars, and then that way we get a working relationship with the next generation as well.
True. And that's, honestly, that's really probably the most important part of this whole situation we're talking about, is because, the parents are, they're aging. My parents are aging. They're in their 80s. Things are changing for them. But yes, if you're not getting in with them, talking with them, and then getting with their family members, their children, you could be missing out on a huge amount of prospects that you could have down the road. Maybe it may not be right now, but down the road. And so you're right. I appreciate that comment. That's a really good idea to work with them and have somebody, because most people don't understand reverse mortgages, and a lot of people just hear things and then they get a little bit afraid because
they have changed the reverse mortgages format in the last few years, and so they're a lot better now than they used to be.
Yeah. And educating ourselves on that, if we don't even know or we don't understand a reverse mortgage, there's no way in the world we can explain it to somebody else. We can't even guide them in the right direction of who to talk to if we don't understand it ourselves and how it works. So yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And so, another couple things just to think about is college students, they're getting ready for graduation. You see them on Facebook, we don't think about getting on there and congratulating them on, hey, I know you don't know me very well, or hey, you don't know me at all, but I just want you to know that now that you're done with college and you're going to start, into your new career, these are some things you may want to think about over the next few years, because I'm sure you'll want to purchase a home eventually. But this is the time now to get yourself set up for that, because a lot of times they have student loans they got to get paid off and stuff first. So, it might be giving them some good pointers on taking the time, get your student loans paid off, and then as soon as that's done, are you thinking maybe in 4 years, 5 years, that maybe you might want to purchase a home? If you do, let me get you some information so when you're ready, you can take that next step. Again, it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen maybe in a year or two, but it might be 3 or 4 years down the road. But because you reached out, they're going to remember that. And then of course you'll follow up with them and always keep them on your mailing list and check in on them, every so often or whatever. But anyway, I just wanted to point out a few of those things, because I think that there's so many benefits of a home ownership that we don't think about. And I do think that it's really important that we know all the different areas, because if we can't explain it to our clients, then we aren't really doing them any favors by trying to sell them a home if we don't understand the ins and outs of everything that needs to be done. So I put these on here because, of course, like I said, they're in the iPro library. So you're more than welcome to go on there. I think that there's a lot of really good information on there that you could use. There's tax savings. There's just so many things. So the first thing I think, though, that we have to talk about when we're determining if somebody's ready for home ownership is we have to ask them the questions that they maybe don't even know the answers to. But again, it's just bringing up instances and things that they have to really think about so that they can start to prepare to look forward that way. Millennials, what I've learned with them, I hate calling them that because my kids actually fall into that, but I guess, you know, if we call baby boomers, we got to call millennials what they are. But to me, it seems like they kind of get a little bit of a bad rap because when you hear millennial, it seems like a lot of people look down on that. And I think that's something that we as realtors have to overcome and realize that it's not a bad thing. Is it a different way of doing things? Absolutely. But when they come out of school or they're in their 20s, 30s, whatever it happens to be, they may not even be thinking about a credit score because they don't care about those kind of things. They haven't been told that that's important. They don't really pay attention to that. They're just kind of here in the now and doing what they're doing, and they're hanging out with their friends and going to college or whatever it happens to be. But I think that one of the first things that if you're going to advertise to people, especially, you know, people that aren't aware, is you need to ask about credit scores and why is it important. So not only asking them, but throwing it out there for them to start thinking about it. That's one thing that I think social media could be really good for. We do see a lot of that, I know, so sometimes you got to get creative in how you present it, but I think that it's important that you throw it out there. The other thing is, can I afford the home that I want? First of all, they may now not even know they want a home because they're renting and think, hey, that's just the way of life. That's how it's going to be. You know, eventually, I would hope that rent will start to come down a bit, hopefully. And then with that, then people will start looking at purchasing homes, and hopefully prices don't go sky high and they stay, you know, kind of calm where they are now, at least, so that people can get into them. But if they're not thinking about putting away money and putting it aside for a down payment one day, that's another thing that we should bring up to them. That's one more thing that you can advertise with. Do they plan on staying in the same area, you know, for a few years? If they are, it's a great time for them to buy. If you've got people that aren't and they're talking about that they're going to be moving to another area in the next year and a half, they may not be the buyer that's going to be working with you, but you can certainly ask the questions of where they're planning on going, and you can start finding somebody you can refer them to and at least get some kind of a referral fee out of it. All these little things that we don't think about. These questions on here are great questions, but in my opinion, I mean, we want the buyers to know these things, but this is a great cheat sheet for you if you're not sure what you should be asking people when you're talking with them. So can I afford the repairs and maintenance? You know what, a lot of people don't realize what goes into buying a home. And I think that we're not doing them a justice if we aren't saying, you know, you got to remember that in addition to your house payment, you have to pay your utilities. You know, you got to pay for repairs because you don't have a landlord. So make sure when you're looking at a home, even though your lender says that you qualify for X amount of dollars, your payment may be this, but make sure that you're okay with that payment plus, you know, another $500 or $600 a month or whatever it happens to be. That's another thing that I think that we have to be really, really careful with when we're out showing homes to people too. Can I afford the monthly utility costs? Same thing. Asking about the costs. My son is 19. He's intellectually disabled, but he's high functioning. And so for him to go over just a typical budget of daily or monthly costs is kind of pushing it for him. Let alone to try to figure out, you know, well, how much are the utilities and how do they change? Why do they change each month? And, you know, are they the same all year? Things like that. I know it seems kind of common sense to say, well, yeah, but that would be part of it. But honestly, I think that a lot of people don't think about that. And I think, you know, people that have bought homes before in the past have quit thinking about that because they become accustomed to what they're already paying. So if they start looking to downsize, that's something that when they're looking for a home, you know, their utilities may be less than what they were. So maybe their payment will still be okay if they do go with a little bit higher price range, things like that. So the 10 most common home buyer questions, of course, what's the first step to home buying process? I'm not going to go through each of these, but I am going to tell you that if you're not explaining to your buyers in depth, I guess you would say, long before you write the offer and start going over contracts with them, you're going to overwhelm them so much. And that's why this is really nice to have a presentation put together for home buyers.
Cindy,
Yes.
is this list any place where we can print it out?
Yes, all of this information is in the iPro library. So if you go in the
Under
library,
buyers?
yep, just go under buyers, and it's just basically, I mean, it's great. There's so much information in there. Don't reinvent the wheel like I've done in the past. I mean, I used to do that over and over again, and I just spent so much time doing the busy work sitting at my desk that I didn't spend time out doing what I should have been doing with the buyers. That's one thing about iPro that I think is amazing is they've got so many resources in that library that a lot of people don't even realize are there.
Hey, Cindy,
Yes.
now might be a time to just drop the iPro library address for those who don't know how to get to it.
I believe it is iPro Realty library. I can't remember now. I will get that for you. I'm just used to going into it, but yes. I'm trying to think if I've got something here that I can grab it off of, but
I know I haven't been to it for a while myself. I have to look it up myself.
yeah. So the one nice thing about the iPro library too is that if you go into the library itself, it has links to everything that you go into. So it has links to SkySlope. It has links to the, you know, if you go into the Pro Agent website, I mean, there's everything you need is in there. You've got seller information that you can hand out. You've got emails you can send out in there. It's just, it's great. I believe it's iPro Realty Library. I don't know. I will find out. I will ask Georgia to send it out to everyone. That's probably the fastest way to do it. But
That'd be good.
If you Google
iProRealtyLibrary.com.
.com. Okay. I wasn't sure if it's org or not. So yeah, there you go.
I know I was looking for an iPro graphic the other day because I'm looking at putting the new cow spots on my Tesla, and so I was looking for the graphics. And so I thought, I know it's there somewhere. I got to look it up. And then a squirrel ran across my desk and I lost it. So.
Yeah. And there's the link in there for the marketing as well. So when you go in, that's where you'll find that is the iPro marketing. So the iPro marketing is public. So anybody can look at that, but the iPro library is not. So, okay. So some other things that you want to talk about, and that's why I like this, is it gives you kind of a breakdown of how to explain to them what the buying process is, how long it's going to take to buy the home. So if you're talking to somebody and they're not sure and they're saying, well, our lease doesn't come due for another 5 months, you know, you can explain to them, okay, well, you know, it normally takes between 30 to 45 days, depending on, you know, appraisals and things like that, depending on what type of loan you're doing to actually, you know, close on a home. So, you know, if you've got 5 months left, we probably want to start looking when we get in about 3.5 months before you're, you know, or, you know what I mean? You just need to depend on where it is, how long they're going to be in there or whatever, but it all is based off of their lease agreements and things like that. But do I need to go through a listing agent to see the property? This is such a good time to explain this to the buyer because it's, in my opinion, if you're doing this before you even start looking at homes, they already know what's expected of them, what they need to do. They know how the process works, so you don't run into these, oh, well, they stopped into an open house, talk to the agent's going to write an offer for them. You avoid all those kind of things. So I really do like this, that you can sit down and actually go over each of those things. Do I have to do all the searching, or do I keep looking myself? Do you do the searching? That's a good time to say, you know what, you can search, and these are the things that, you know, you can go to. But in the meantime, I'm going to be, you know, doing searches as well, sending them over. How much do you have to pay for the buyer? You know, do I pay for a buyer's agent as the home buyer? You can explain to them how that works. That's the time you start talking about due diligence. And I think that a lot of agents get really scared to talk about, I'm not due diligence, buyer broker agreement, because they panic going, oh, I don't know them that well yet. Well, now's the time before you've even signed that with them. If you need to, you can sit down and explain to them why it's important and how that works. So I really like how this is laid out. Do I have any other fees besides my down payment? And they may not even know that they need a down payment. I mean, depending on the loan, that's a good time to talk about that. Do I have to submit any money prior to settlement? That would be the time to talk about earnest money. Where's the earnest money going to come from? Explaining what an HOA is, because a lot of times they don't understand or know what that means. If they're looking at a townhome because they're first-time homeowners and that's the price range they're in, and they don't understand what an HOA is, and there's a $200 a month HOA fee, and that's not taken into consideration when they're getting qualified with the lender, now's the time to be explaining to them that, hey, you know, just so you know, you have to qualify with that extra $200 for that association fee. So how can I be sure I'm not purchasing a money pit? Probably not many people nowadays are going to call it a money pit. That's kind of a thing from the show, The Money Pit. But, you know, people are concerned about that. And that's the time to talk about inspections. What's your best advice for first time home buyers? Again, now's the best time is to talk to them about how important it is to, you know, narrow it down to homes that they want. What is it you're looking for? Making sure that they, you know, they got everything in order, making sure they're not buying things when they shouldn't be buying things, you know, on credit after they've gotten approved. There's so many things that we have to talk to about them with them that I think that we're missing the boat on. And by the time we sit down with the buyers and we go through a few homes and we write up a contract, it's just too late. It's too late to explain that. So I really think that if you decide you want to do any kind of a buyer, say a lunch and learn or seminar or something, just this PowerPoint alone that I have that I took right off of the library, you could easily use that to do a training if you wanted to use that. So again, don't reinvent the wheel, use what's there. I'm not positive, but I'm pretty sure that Bruce is the one that's put these together, and you know, he does a really good job. So if you guys have something that needs to be added on there, or you you know, you want it to be kind of more to represent just you and you want to personalize it, he can do that for you too. You just need to ask. Any questions or comments up to this point? Nope. Okay. So since we're talking about buyer brokerage, what's the meaning, definition, and explanation? I think that this is maybe the one thing that's skipped over the most out of everything that agents do. And I think that typically it's because they don't either understand how to explain it, or they don't understand it themselves, or they're just scared of what maybe the buyer might say or do, and they're trying to not lose the buyer. But I think that if you start out by talking about you as the buyer's agent and what they can expect from you, that starts that discussion and makes it so much easier. So when you're talking to them, you're going to explain to them that how you're going to go through all the different listings. You're going to sit down first of all and say, tell me what it is that you absolutely have to have. And then we're going to start narrowing that down. What type of home are you looking for? What area are you looking for? We're going to go through all of these things. You know, basically it's not a process of, it's a process of elimination. And so when you're going through them, when you know that there are certain homes that they say, hey, we wanted to see this, this, or this, you can say, well, I'm willing to show that to you. However, when we first met, you told me these are the things that you were really, that you really had to have, and these don't have that. Are you still okay with that? Sometimes they forget, sometimes they change their mind. But the one thing is we always, that way we're always in tune with what it is they're looking for. You can talk to them about how the properties that are out there that are for sale by any company or agent, that you can actually show them so they understand that. That's the time to talk to them about new construction, that you can work with the builder, that most all builders will work with us and they will pay our brokerage fee, that it wouldn't cost them anything, but that they need to make sure if they do happen to stop by anything, they have to give them your name and let them know that you are representing them, and talk to them about why that's so important, that the seller represents the seller only, or the seller's agent only represents the seller, how important that is, that they don't go into a for sale by owner or a new construction model home or something and start telling them all of their personal finances and information. That could really be a detriment to them when they start to try to negotiate. Again, so, you know, if you have people that you're not sure of and you haven't got them pre-qualified yet, start there, because that's really the most important. You don't want to be driving people around in your car, of course. You don't want to lose buyers, but you might be losing good buyers that are ready to buy now if you're not making sure that they're qualified ahead of time. And we all know that. We were taught that in school, but sometimes we kind of forget that that's kind of the important number one thing to do. Let them know that you'll make the appointments with the sellers to view the homes, that's not something they need to do. They don't need to contact the seller's agent to make the appointment, that's something that you will do. Again, it's just kind of going through a step-by-step of the important things of what they can expect from you. And of course, once you do that, then you can say, and in return, what I ask of you is, again, this is kind of a cheat sheet for you, but it's a good way to go through each thing. If you go through this and there's certain things that you don't feel like are as important that you need to point out, then just skip through. You don't have to read, you know, word by word. But I think that what it does is it sets them up. I think when people know ahead of time what's expected of them, they feel a little more committed. And they feel maybe a little bit more guilty if they were to go in somewhere and start negotiating with another agent that, you know, tries to steal them away from you or whatever you want to call it. I think if they know ahead of time that won't happen. It may happen once in a great while, but most of the time it won't.
Also, when getting folks pre-qualified and starting to send them listings, I always have them sign a buyer broker. And I put it in terms that the state of Utah wants to know who is representing them as buyers. That is part of my liability and my brokerage liability in helping them through the process and you know, taking that liability on ourselves, that we need to have a contract to show them that we are going to be loyal to them and represent them 100%. And honestly, if they're not willing to take that step, you know, you kind of shake your head and say, well, you know, okay,
Yeah.
we need to have a little discussion, because, you know, how far do you want to go with a buyer like that, really, that's just going to use you for information?
Mm-hmm. Well, and again, I think that it really seriously does come down to how informed they are. And I do think that agents make it much more complicated than what it really is. They think they think if you think you're trapping them and you're trying to get them to sign something so that they are bound to you, you're sadly mistaken. Because they don't care what they've signed. They don't, you know, if they don't like you or something happens or their best friend decides to get their license or something, it's not going to stop them. But I really do think it's important, like you said, you know, the sooner that this comes out and you're talking about it, the more, you know, the easier it's going to be. But, you know, when you sit down and you write up an offer and then you have them sign the buyer broker agreement, then, you know, that's way past the point of when you should have been explaining it. And I do think a lot of agents do that. And I know they do because I used to look at their contracts as they would come through and I would see the dates of when they actually had the buyer broker agreement signed, and I'd see the contract date and it was always the same day. You know, Yeah. And so, for somebody to say, well, yeah, but I explained it to him before. Well, yeah, but it didn't really make much difference. If you hadn't signed it, then obviously you didn't go through it. You didn't have it in front of you, obviously, because if you did, you wouldn't have signed it then. So I think that's really important. I do think that, we do get some buyers that, sometimes they come and go. I mean, that's just part of the business. But yeah, I think that when you say in return what I ask of you, it starts to hold them accountable and you can make them liable for what's going to happen. And that's why, it says on here, keep me informed of any homes that you may be interested in or visiting open houses or for sale by owners. Because on the second paragraph here, it says inform other real estate agents and builder representatives that you're working with me as your buyer's agent, so they do not violate the laws of agency.
Right. And if you don't have a signed agreement with them, you're not really their realtor.
No. And you know what? A lot of times I've seen this, so many times. You guys probably have too. I mean, when you're in the business long enough, you see everything. But I have seen so many times an agent get upset because their client went to a builder and they didn't register them, and they didn't mention their agent to them. And then 2 months later, they're like, hey, we have a buyer we were working together. That's my buyer. Well, do you have a buyer broker agreement in place? Well, no. Well, then you're not really their agent. And second of all, even if you have one in place and it's been 2 months and you don't know that they've already wrote an offer 2 months ago on this home, you're probably not that involved with the buyer. So it's as much as for us to be accountable as it is for our buyers. But most of all, I think that, it really is the most important thing is just to have that communication with them. And when you're sitting down writing up an offer, there's just too much going on. They don't even know what they're signing. All they know is if I want this house, I got to sign all this paperwork.
That's right.
Yeah. So that's not the time to be explaining the difference of agency, because I don't think that people realize sometimes that, buyers go out and they talk and they visit and they're talking to sellers when they're walking through a house and they're, disclosing all their information about how much they're qualified for and how much their down payment is, or, you know what I mean? They need to know that those are things that can really hurt them. And so I really do believe in having these kind of things ahead of time, and having those discussions. So, it's not always going to be possible, but most of the time, I think there's plenty of time for it. Okay, so the home search, of course, this is just, again, for them to break it down. I put them on here so that you guys are aware what's on there. You can use what you want, take out what you don't like. But it's kind of neat because it does walk them through the process of what really happens. I like this one because it's the transaction process. Even for sellers, this is a really good, way to say this is all the things that are going to happen during the transaction and who's involved in the transaction. So that's a good time to talk to them about title companies and lenders and, tell them there's so many people involved in the transaction that they're not going to be overwhelmed when they start getting all these different emails and things like that. So, sorry, I'm trying to keep track of time here. Where are we at? We're at 2 o'clock. So my goal was my goal is always to try to be done on time, if not a little bit early, because I know that you guys have things going on. So we'll talk about buyer's agency now. And so since we're on that topic already, is there any questions that you have that you want answered now that I might not get to in the next half hour through the contract, through the buyer broker agreement? Oh, sorry, if you need to talk, you'll have to unmute, just so you know. But okay, well, like I said, in the meantime, if something comes up or you remember something, just pop on in there and ask me the questions. I'm not opposed to that at all. So a great buyer's agent is more than a taxi cab driver, right? We typically nowadays, I don't think that we ride around with them as much in vehicles as we used to before. I used to have the whole family in my car. In some ways that was great because I got to know them on a personal level. I got to know their kids or whoever was in the car, but in other ways, oh my gosh, it was just so much work to try to keep up with the conversations, the directions of where you had to go. Maybe texts coming in from some of the agents saying, hey, sorry, the seller has to cancel, whatever it had to be. But I do think that sometimes that's what the general population thinks about us, is that we just go out. That's what we do, is we go out and we look at all these homes and we get to see all these wonderful different places. And there's so much more involved than just that. And so on this page, I have highlighted a few of the things that I have noticed in the past when I have been doing auditing of files in our offices and stuff like that, especially when I have my own office, when I did it myself. But so the exclusive buyer broker agreement and agency disclosure, again, the sooner you can get this filled out and go over it with your client, the better. But make sure that when you do that when you're putting the buyers on there, make sure that you're putting all the buyers that are you're working with, that are going to be signing for a home, that are going to be qualifying for the home. It can't just be one buyer. Excuse me. It can't be the one buyer and then, the wife, but not the husband, or vice versa. Whoever's going to be a part of this loan needs to be on there. Or if it's cash, of course, whoever's going to be buying it, and I'm going on title. But anyway, what I want to point out on here is that a lot of people make the mistake of putting the date here on the first paragraph where it says ending at 5 p.m. Mountain Time. I've noticed that a lot of agents will put the date that it starts right there. So if you do that, your contract is going to expire before it even starts. So make sure you don't want to go back later and try to get that changed, especially if something goes wrong in the deal, because it's just too late. So be careful with that. Make sure you're putting it out there. Make sure that you're giving yourself enough time as well. If you're looking at a property and you're going to be working with people, say they're making an offer and you didn't get the buyer broker agreement filled out in time, and so you're doing it at the time of the contract, and you put that date on there for a month or something, that might not be the home that they're going to buy. So you may need 3 months, 6 months, whatever it happens to be. Typically I usually put on there for a period of 6 months. I do the same thing as I normally do for a listing agreement, depending on who it is. I mean, it could be somebody that you're just going to represent them on that home only. That could be a different situation, but make sure that you fill that out correctly. And then it does also state on here that it's for the acquisition of a property, and it's going to say in blank county or be located at. So if it's only for a certain property address, then of course you would put that property address. If that's the only one, if they say, you know what, we're only going to work with you on this one, we don't know if we're going to use an agent if we don't get this one, that would be the time you'd use that as the location. Otherwise, if you're going to work with them and you're in certain counties, like mine, for instance, I would normally put Weber and Davis County. I've seen people put all counties, but I mean, you can't really work across the whole state if you don't live across the whole state all the time. But, that's just something that you need to decide what counties that you want to be working in. Brokerage fee in the next section. I just want to make sure that you understand that on the brokerage fee, there is 2 lines, and it's really different when you're trying to do a compliance fee addendum. I've had a lot of questions about that. People say, well, what about that compliance fee addendum? If we're going to do that and they're going to charge the $150 on that, are we going to put the $150 here and then a 3% or whatever it is that you're going to put on there? What I would suggest is that if you're going to do the compliance fee addendum, which you should be doing, if the buyer's going to be paying that, what I would do is to make it very clear where it says amount, on the amount, the dollar amount, I would put on there, I would put $150 as let's see, on the, I can't remember how I used to put that on there, as per the compliance fee addendum attached. You can spell all that out on there. If you're typing it on there, it will spread it out, and there's enough room to do that. What you don't want to do is you don't want to put a dollar amount only or a percentage only that happens to be less or more than what you need to collect. So I guess what I would tell you is it used to say or there, and we used to put in the dollar amount, we would put like a line through it or put a 0 and then put the percentage. But if you're going to collect the 150, then I would definitely address it here and put on there that, you know, as on the addendum, the compliance fee addendum. I think that clears up a lot of confusion, and people aren't feeling like if you put a 0 here and then you got a compliance fee addendum, that now you're charging the 150. To me, that kind of seems like, well, wait a minute, you put that there was nothing and now you're saying that there is. I think it's a lot to have to explain. If you're going to pay for the compliance fee out of your commission or whatever, that's fine. I would still, if it was me, I would still put it on there. But on the compliance fee addendum, if you're going to pay it, I would mark it on there, and I would put paid by, to be paid by the buyer agent, and still have them sign it so that they're aware that you're giving them a credit of something that they would normally have had to pay. I think that makes, you know, a lot of sense to disclose it. And I think that that way the company also knows when you upload the contract, they know that that's what the case is, and that there's no confusion about who's paying that fee. Is there any questions on the compliance fee or the brokerage fee on that section?
I would
Do
just
you
add
put
that.
3%?
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
The title company needs to know who's going to pay that compliance fee. So if you put on the REPC, you know, the title company goes by the REPC. And if you're going to change it and pay it as an agent, then you need to let the title company know that. Otherwise, they'll take it out of the buyers.
Yeah, so okay, so it wouldn't be on the REPC. Did you mean the buyer broker agreement?
Yeah.
'Cause
Oh,
we-
yeah. Yeah. I've got what you, okay. My mistake.
That's okay. That's okay. So yes, if, for instance, if you're going to pay it, so typically, Beverly will send over the form to the title company to let them know what deduction, what's coming out of that broker.
Exactly. Right. You're right.
Yeah. So, but yeah, it wouldn't be part of the REPC, but it would definitely be part of this. So if you don't have an agreement in place with this and that addendum to collect that from that buyer, then you're paying it basically.
Right.
So yeah. So if they are paying it, yes, definitely make sure that when you send your contracts into the title company, that they're aware that there is a compliance fee being collected by the buyer. So
Thank
yeah.
you for clarifying that for me. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
So Cindy, do you need to fill in then the 100, am I repeating this back right? $150, is that what you said? And is then the first line by the $sign and then the percentage?
Yes. So what I would do is in the dollar amount, I would put $150 as per, and I would type it out as per the compliance fee addendum attached. Because if not, it could look like you're going to collect 150 there, and then you're going to have them sign the compliance addendum. That could be another 150.
Okay, and then on the percentage, what do you put?
I typically will put 3%.
Okay, that's what I
Yeah.
thought.
Mm-hmm. Because even if it falls below, you know, if it falls below the 3% on the MLS, just so you guys know, that's my next highlighted section on here. Just so you're aware, it depends on what you want to do with this. But if the BAC is less than the amount shown above, oh, sorry, I need to, whoever's isn't muted, we have to mute you. Sorry, we're getting some sound coming back at us. There we go. So the buyer will pay the difference at closing if the BAC is less than shown on the above. So if the property is listed with a brokerage in the absence of a commission agreement with the owner of the selected property, the brokerage fee above shall be paid by the buyer. So if you're working with a buyer and for sale by owner, you write an offer and they're not willing to pay that 3%, you need to, the buyer needs to be aware that they're liable for that 3%. And so that's why it's really hard to write up a buyer broker agreement when you're writing up an offer, especially say on a for sale by owner, because you don't know if the for sale by owner is going to agree to pay that 3%. If you don't get that signed and you don't get this signed, you're not going to get paid. So be really careful with that. could you go after the buyer for a difference? Say they were offering 2% on the MLS, but you have on here it's 3%. You know, you could. I don't personally, because first of all, I just accept what it is that the agents are offering. Do I think it's right all the time? No, but I think it's really hard to have your buyer come up with a difference on the home that they absolutely love. To ask for another 1% or something, it's just, I have a hard time with that because they already think we make too much money as it is. And so, you know, I'm not saying not to do it. I'm just saying, I think you have to be very careful. You have to think about the future buyer that you're working with in the future, if they're going to refer other people to you, and it just becomes a really slippery slope that way. Also, I highlighted on here that, of course, you know, we get paid when the documents are, you know, when it's closed, recorded. But if it's a lease, if they decide to lease something, the effective date of the lease is when the brokerage fee would typically get paid. So, you know, if it's a listing, then we already have that taken care of on the MLFs if it's on there. But if it's not, if it's an option, it's the date the option agreement is signed. But most of all, if the transaction is prevented by the buyer or defaulted by the buyer, compensation may, you know, immediately be payable to the company. That's another section that, you know, we hate to even think about that, but, you know, if you're working with a buyer and you've spent 4 months with them and you've showed them a lot of homes and you've just put so much time into them, and for some weird reason at the end they just decide they're not buying the house or whatever happens, they need to be aware of that when they're signing this, because I think that, again, that makes better, loyal buyers out of your people you're working with. If they know that that's the situation, they're not going to waste your time. But I want you to be aware that it's in there, because I think it's really important that you need to know that it's there. So, sorry, I don't mean to repeat, but of course, you know, I can't reiterate enough how important it is to know these contracts and make sure that you understand them so you can explain them to them. If you go through and even highlight the things that I've highlighted, the really important things before you sit down with them, I do that a lot. I will highlight as I'm going through, or I'll highlight before we even sit down to go over it, because they're the things that I really want to make sure, number one, I cover with them, but second of all, I want them to be aware when I highlight them, it stands out so that they're aware of it and we're talking about it, they can ask questions or whatever. If you have a buyer that you're kind of worried about that's not paying attention, you can have them initial each section that, you know, next to the number after you go through it, if you want to do that even. Again, it's accountability. So protection period, you know, a lot of people are not sure what to put there. Protection period just basically says that within, you know, 2 months, 3 months, whatever you put on there, after the termination or expiration of the exclusive buyer broker agreement, the buyer or any person acting in the buyer's behalf enters into an agreement to purchase, exchange, obtain, or an option or lease a property located for the buyer by the buyer's agent or company, on which the buyer agent negotiates in buyer's behalf. During the initial term, buyer agrees to pay the company a brokerage fee, you know, as referenced in section 2. So basically what that's doing is extending it out long enough that say you had an agreement for 3 months and your buyer broker agreement expires, you know, at the end of May, and you're not closing on the home that's under contract with them until the end of June. This takes that and kind of pushes it out a little bit longer, so that if it does expire while you're still negotiating or going through the purchase agreement, you still it's still in effect. So I typically will put on there, I usually put 2 or 3 months on there. Buyer representation and disclosures, again, that is the best time to find out, you know, you have not entered into another buyer broker agreement, right? Like we talked about before. A lot of times when you first ask them, when you're talking with them, that's one of the first things you want to ask anyway when you start talking to a buyer. I usually will say, are you out looking on your own, or are you working with an agent that's been helping you find a home? and usually they'll say, oh yeah, my agent so-and-so, or no, we've looked at a couple homes, but we haven't signed anything, or we haven't, committed. And I will ask them again, okay, so you have not signed an exclusive buyer broker agreement with anybody else, is that correct? This is the best way to ask that. It's already in the contract. So again, just make sure that in all communication, of course, you're telling them, with any other real estate agents, notify the agents in advance that you're entering into this buyer broker agreement, with me. And then it says also on here, the buyer will, on B, furnish the buyer's agent with relevant personal and financial information to facilitate the buyer's ability. I know that they have in the on the MLS forms, they have a buyer like a buyer application type of form. It asks for information that, in my opinion, we shouldn't have. Number one, social security numbers, their driver's license numbers, the things that we don't need to write up an offer. I don't want to be responsible for that. I don't want to be carrying that around. So, financial information to facilitate would usually typically be, say you have a short sale that you're working with or something like that. Foreclosures, a lot of times you'll get the seller's information, but a buyer's information, you shouldn't need much of that because the loan officer is going to get it. So I would really limit on what it is that you take or accept from them. Sorry, Margie's writing me. Oh, you're so funny. You're impressed with me, Margie? You're so nice. Anyway, so again, make sure that you're just explaining to them that, upon signing the exclusive buyer broker agreement, personally review and sign the buyer due diligence checklist and wire fraud alert disclosure. That is part of this buyer broker agreement. So when you have your listing agreement, you have these same type of forms. You have the seller disclosures, you have the wire form, all of those things are included. Lead-based paint disclosures are included as part of the listing. Your buyer broker agreement is the same way. So just so you know, if you don't have that exclusive buyer broker agreement, along with the buyer due diligence signed and the wire fraud disclosure, you don't have a complete buyer broker agreement. So just so you know, disclose to the buyer's agent all properties in which the buyer, as of the date of this exclusive buyer broker agreement, is either negotiating to acquire or has a present interest in acquiring. So basically what you're saying to them is anything that you're thinking about looking at, buying, whatever, if it's new construction, make sure that you present that to me so I know that you've got an interest in acquiring it so I can be a part of it. What it comes down to is make sure that they're talking to you and communicating anything that they go look at. I usually will give my clients a stack of cards and say, here you go. As soon as if you're out, I know that sometimes, you get excited and you see an open house somewhere and you want to go through it. That's fine. You're welcome to do that. These are my rules. Number one, don't talk about your personal information. Don't give up any of your financial information. Don't even tell the seller's agent how excited you are that you think you're going to make an offer on the house. Just make sure you walk in and give them my card and let them know that you are working with me, that I am representing you. I really have never had many problems with people going with somebody else, as long as I follow that kind of, typical rule, because then they know up front and they feel a little bit more obligated, I think, to make sure that they're doing what you've asked them to do. Agency relationships, again, duties of the buyer's agent. Again, make sure that you understand what it is that you're talking to them about, and most of all, make sure that you, as an agent for the buyer's agent, you're explaining to them your fiduciary duty to them as the buyer to do work with the buyers, include loyalty, obedience, full disclosure, confidentiality, reasonable care, and any other duties required by law. The really important thing about that is, if you're the listing agent and you're sitting down with the buyer and you're going to write up an offer as a limited agent, you cannot do that unless you've got the authorization and the signature from the seller saying that they allow you to do that. I see a lot of agents that will tell me, well, I told them about limited agency and whatever. Well, you didn't, because you got it signed 2 days after you wrote the offer, and you already had communicated with the seller, negotiated back and forth, got an accepted offer, and then the limited agency agreement was signed. If you want to get into a lot of trouble and you want to lose your license, that seriously is probably the biggest issue. That if you face that and you don't follow through the way it's supposed to be done correctly, that would be the one that you would lose your license over. That's where most people feel like they get taken advantage of. And so I'm not saying not to ever work as a limited agent. It is, in some ways, has good things, but in other ways has bad. You know, it's nice if everybody's nice and it all goes smooth, but as soon as it doesn't, you're the only person they're going to come back on, because there's no other agent involved. So if you don't follow and, you know, dot your I's, cross your T's, and all those wonderful things, you're going to get yourself into trouble. So be really careful with the limited agent situation. And so instead of me going through this and talking and reading the whole thing, again, you have to make sure that you get the okay from the sellers to represent both parties, or you cannot do that. So any questions or comments on that? Concerns? Nope. Okay, you guys are an awfully quiet bunch. Is this because everybody was already in the other training earlier? I'm sure it is. So, okay, professional advice. Of course, we know that we are licensed and trained in marketing of real estate. At the very bottom of this, of course, is the buyer's advised that it's up to the buyer and in the buyer's sole discretion to choose a third-party services that meet the needs of the buyer, not to rely on recommendations given by the company of the buyer's agent. If you are working with different inspectors that you have a good relationship with, good for you, but you cannot advertise with them. Our company has already told me as a broker and the other brokers, and I've talked about this in some of our team meetings, but sometimes you get, we found that there's some inspectors that are, and they're not doing it on purpose to do anything wrong, but they're actually trying to help, but they put the main copy of the inspection report, and on the front they'll put a picture of them and their information, then they'll put a picture of the agent or the business card of the agent. You can't do that. It's too much of a liability. That's a third party. We don't want to be involved in that. That's something that the buyer should be ordering, not you. If you order it, you're going to get stuck paying for it if it doesn't get paid. If something goes wrong and it was you that ordered it, they can say, well, that she's the one that ordered it, he's the one that ordered it. There's a lot of liability there, so be very careful with that. On dispute resolution, of course, the main thing here is that if anything arises, that they agree that they shall first be submitted to mediation through a mediation provider, mutually agreed upon by the buyer and seller, and that everyone will agree to bear their own costs. So attorney's fees, same thing. We know that, you know, once it goes that far, hopefully it never does, that everyone has to pay for their attorney's fees, and depending on how the wording and everything is in there, sometimes the prevailing party will have to pay, things like that or whatever. But buyer's authorizations, sorry, I'm kind of trying to get this done in a shorter amount of time, and we're almost out of time. So buyer's authorizations, again, make sure that they understand that you can disclose after closing to the MLS. Communicate with them for the purpose of soliciting real estate goods. This is so I've had people ask me about the buyers and sellers, and can you contact them once the sale is over? This form is what gives you the authorization to do that. So you don't have to worry about, you know, if they're on the do not call list or anything like that. I mean, of course, if later they said, you know, don't contact me anymore, you wouldn't want to, but this is where you get the okay to do that. The other thing on here is earnest money deposits can be placed into an interest-bearing trust account with paid interest to the association, Utah Association of Realtors. They call that YERHOF. I don't think any of the title companies have the interest-bearing accounts. So with our company, where we put everything into a trust account at the title company, this wouldn't really apply. But it has to be on there just so that people can know. And just so you know, if you're not aware of what it is, it's a really good thing. I mean, it's for affordable housing throughout the state that we work with and stuff. So it is a good thing. But the attachments. So make sure that in addition to your buyer due diligence checklist and your wire fraud alert disclosure, make sure that in addition to that and this form that you're checking the compliance fee addendum or any other addendums that might follow. You could have a subject to, say if they're going to write an offer or there's something coming up, you know that they're going to be writing an offer on a short sale. You may want to find the correct addendum to put in there for the short sale addendum as well. They have one of those. But mostly just make sure that anything that you're going to put in here, if you're going to exclude a certain property, that if they buy it, normally you'd do that on a listing. If somebody was going to buy a home, they had already walked through before, they were kind of worried that, you know, they'd have to pay you. But anything you agree to, make sure you're checking that if there is or there is not an additional addendum. And most of the times we should have, and I put an example there of compliance fee addendum or any other agreements that you've made with them. If you tell them you're going to give them a $500 gift card when this is over out of your commission or whatever, put it on that addendum. Make sure that that's very clear. So equal housing, of course, we all know that we have to, you know, comply with equal housing, and everything pretty much is done electronically now. The due on sale clause, just make sure that if you're working with somebody that decides that they're going to do an option on a home, they're going to lease it for a while and then they're going to have the option to buy it, and they make that agreement of how much it's going to be, you will want to make sure that they understand that if the seller has a mortgage on the home, the lender may call that loan due and payable if they find out that they're participating in certain types of transactions. And that's something to tell your sellers as well. So if there's anything that has that due on sale clause, it could happen. So if, for instance, somebody's renting a house, they're leasing it from them, but they're going to buy it in 6 months, but we've already got the contract put together. That's the type of thing I'm talking about. They may not be able to lease that home. It may be an FHA home where it has to be owner occupied. So be aware of that. And of course, the entire agreement basically says that the buyer due diligence checklist and the wire fraud addendum, disclosure, and any other addendums that follow are part of this, and that the entire agreement is legal binding. The effective date is really important to know. So if you notice on here where I highlighted, the effective date is number 1 is when the buyer and the agent and or broker have signed this exclusive buyer broker agreement, and the authorized buyer's agent or broker has received a mutually signed copy of the exclusive buyer broker agreement. That's the effective date. So it has to be when they've received a copy of this. So if you have them sign it and you don't provide them a copy of that, that could be a breach of your contract right there. So if somebody wanted to get out of something and you can't prove that you actually gave them copies of these things, that's why we do the transaction document receipt, is to make sure that, you know, you're showing that you got that. I would suggest that anything that you're going to give to your clients, that you email them a copy. Even if you hand them a copy, I would still email a copy so that you have something showing that you can pull up that says, yes, this was sent on this day and this was the attachment. So that is pretty much it as far as the buyer broker agreement goes. So we're pretty much getting done on time. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Anything they want me to clarify that I've went over? Anything I might have said that wasn't right that you're you're concerned about? I'm open for, you know, any kind of feedback. So go ahead and unmute yourself if you want to make any comments, and I'll sit here and wait, and I'm willing to discuss whatever you need to. Otherwise, if you're signing off, thank you so much for joining, and I'll make sure I get your names in.
Thanks, Cindy.
You're welcome. Thank you.
It's a great class, Cindy.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I know it kind of slow going at the beginning, you know, and forms aren't always the funnest thing to go over, but there's so many things a lot of times that we just don't even know are there. So
Great review. Thank you so much.
Yes,
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
you bet.
Thanks a lot. Enjoyed
Thank
it.
you guys. Have a great rest of your day.
You too. Oh, I can't leave. Here you go.